Right, this video is going to be about ageism. Ageism is a particular type of prejudice that focuses on age. It's where people are categorized and judged solely on the basis of their chronological age. You make assumptions about them based on their age. Now, we're going to talk about this in the context of late adulthood and the assumptions that we make about people who are older, who are over 65. But I mean, ageism also could apply to when you make assumptions about younger individuals, like maybe you're hiring for a job and someone who's like 18 shows up to apply and you're like, oh, I don't want someone that young. They're going to be irresponsible. If you assume that they're going to be irresponsible simply because of their age, that's also ageism. We definitely do see a lot of ageism at play with how we, what we expect of people over 65, how we treat them. And so the problem with ageism, just like any other stereotype or prejudice behavior, it considers people as part of a category. It's a generalization. It simplifies people to the degree of being just outright inaccurate. So you have to consider people as individuals. Now, with any kind of stereotype, including ageist beliefs, sometimes stereotypes will seem to be confirmed because of something called a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so if you are familiar with the term self-fulfilling prophecy, I know I go over it in social psychology. I don't know if I have gone over it in developmental psychology. I'm just going to assume you need a refresher at the very least. So a self-fulfilling prophecy, this happens where you expect someone to act a certain way and you treat them differently because of their expectation. And since you're treating them differently, they do act differently. And then, they confirm your stereotypes. You know, one example of a self-fulfilling prophecy is like in education. If a child is labeled as being like a slow learner or even gifted, and a teacher sees that label, they will treat that child differently based on those labels. And then sometimes, and we've seen this in research where we manipulated labels on just average children, that, you know, the teachers will start to treat them differently based on what they expect of them. Oh, well, this is a slow learner. Why bother? They will not encourage them as much. And then they don't do as well in the class, and they confirm that label of slow learner, even though if it was originally just randomly assigned to an average typical child, or if they think the child is gifted, they're like, oh, I'm going to encourage this child. I'm going to get them to work harder. I'm not going to let them give up. And then they do well, and they seem to confirm the label of gifted. Those are examples of self-fulfilling prophecies. You expect someone to act a certain way, so you treat them based on how you expect them to act, and then they act that way, and you're like, so it was right. The stereotype was right. So how does this work with ageism? All right, so younger adults treat older adults differently based on their ageist beliefs. And so they assume things like, well, this person's going to be frail and confused. I'm going to assume that they can't do things for themselves. I'm going to assume that they can't do things, that they can't behave independently. They may not understand what's going on. And you treat them in this insulting, demeaning manner. And then the older adult, they get used to this sort of treatment, and so they will start to behave in a manner that looks dependent and confused because they're just, it's what is expected of them. It's what the treatment calls for. And then in situations where you've got younger and older adults work, in the same workplace or volunteer setting or something like that, when professionals believe that the norms for young adults should apply to everyone. So things like, okay, so my younger folks here can lift this much. Everybody should be able to lift this much. And then the older adult, they try to do exactly what the younger adult does, not acknowledging, hey, there are changes that come along with getting older. Then they fail, and then they give up. All right, so the idea here is there was no accommodation whatsoever for age. So they tried to do it exactly like the younger adult. With accommodations, they might have been able to contribute, but they weren't given the opportunity for accommodations. And I've heard stories where like a lot of my students work in settings where they're like cashiers. And In the United States, it's actually not like this in other countries, I've heard, but in the United States, there's sort of the assumption that cashiers should stand, that they should not sit. It's sort of looked down upon when you see a cashier sitting. I don't know why. Why do they need to be standing to ring up your order? The cash register still works if they're sitting. So you've got someone who is older, maybe they have hip pain, joint pain. They are still perfectly capable of running that cash register. They are perfectly capable of friendly customer service, all right? But they say, oh, my back is hurting, can I sit at work? And the boss may be like, no, you can't sit. Nobody else has to sit. Why should I let you sit? And then they try standing and it's too painful and they can't do it, they have to quit. All right, so that feeds into that stereotype of, oh, well, older people just can't do the job. You know, it's not that they couldn't do the job, it's that you didn't make appropriate accommodations, reasonable, appropriate accommodations. And then another thing that happens is as you get older, you can focus on what you have gained from age or you can focus on what you've lost. When older adults focus on what they have lost, when they focus too much on comparing themselves to their younger self, when they focus on losses rather than gains, they can lose the joy of getting older, and that can contribute to these ageist beliefs because you see someone who's miserable, you're like, oh, I don't want to get old. I don't want to be miserable like that, even though that's not the only option. There are some individuals who age, you know, gracefully with joy. They're like, yeah, I can't do all that stuff I did when I was younger, but man, I know so much. I have learned so many things about the world. I've got to watch all these major events, and I'm better at many of my hobbies, and I've gotten to read and watch great movies, and raise my kids, all these things that could be focused on, but they are not necessarily focused on. So these things kind of all come together to sometimes feed into ageist beliefs. Now, another thing that's related to ageism or behaviors related to ageism is we have this thing we do when we get around older adults, even if they are older adults who can hear just fine. We talk to them in a way that is very condescending and demeaning. Like, hi, Grandma. It's good to see you today. Did you get your lunch today? And Grandma's probably sitting there like, why are you talking to me like I'm a toddler? So there's this special type of speaking, this condescending, demeaning manner of speech where you talk to them like a toddler, you talk to them overly loud, overly exaggerated. That's called elderspeak. Elderspeak, a condescending way of speaking to older adults that resembles baby talk, good for babies, not for adults, with simple and short sentences, exaggerated emphasis, repetition, and a slower rate and a higher pitch than normal speech. Now, sometimes I'll have students say, well, I know people who are old, and well, they have hearing problems. So sometimes people do this because they know that person has hearing problems. Okay, let's think about it. If you have hearing problems, yelling louder, does that help? Does it? All right. Getting up in somebody's face and talking to them like they're a toddler, is that what is helpful? Or if you're worried about hearing problems, would it be more beneficial to go slow, to speak in a nice, clear voice, but to pause and make sure that they heard you? That is more respectful and more effective than talking to them like babies. All right, so be familiar with what elderspeak is. All right, now, the next video is about a topic a lot of students don't like me to talk about. Old people still have sex.